Welcome back to the Bible Stories. You may notice there are no ads on this video because YouTube has demonetized our channel. To support us, you can scan the first QR code to join the Bible Stories podcast app, where you can listen offline and access exclusive episodes. Or, if you simply want to give, you can scan the second QR code to donate directly. Thank you for helping us keep these Bible stories going. It is the third year of a Persian king, and an old man is standing on the bank of a wide river called the Tigris. He has lived through the fall of one empire and the rise of another. He was taken from his home as a boy, marched across the desert in chains, and forced to serve kings who did not know his God. Now his hair is white, his friends are gone, and the city he loved is still a heap of broken stones far away. He should be resting. Instead, he is mourning and praying, and he can feel that something is about to happen. Then the sky seems to tear open. A figure appears, clothed in fine linen, with a face like lightning and eyes like burning fire. The men who are with Daniel cannot see anything, but they feel it, and they run and hide. Daniel is left alone, and the strength drains out of his body. He falls to the ground with his face in the dust. A hand touches him. A voice tells him to stand up and listen, because he has been chosen to be shown what no one else of his time would see. What this man showed Daniel was the end of the world, the end of human history as it has always run, and the beginning of something that would never end. Daniel saw it, and then he was told to write it down. Thousands of years before the world you live in existed, an old prophet in exile picked up a pen and recorded what is waiting at the finish of all things. And what he wrote is not what most people expect. People hear that the Bible talks about the end of the world, and they assume it must be a book of terror. They picture fire and panic and a calendar counting down to disaster. Some avoid the whole subject because it frightens them, and others chase it like a puzzle, trying to match every strange image to a headline in the news. But Daniel did not write to frighten anyone, and he did not write a code for clever people to crack. He wrote for the kind of person who feels small and afraid in a world that seems out of control. He wrote for people who would one day live under cruel rulers, watch good things crumble, and wonder if God had forgotten them. He wrote, in other words, for people very much like us. That is why his words still matter. The world Daniel lived in felt like it was ending too. His nation had been crushed. His temple had been burned. The faithful were a tiny minority surrounded by power that mocked their God. And into that fear, God gave one man a window into the future so that everyone who came after could know how the story turns out. When you know the ending of a story, you can walk through the middle of it without losing heart. That is the gift Daniel left behind. So let us follow him into what he saw in the order he came to understand it, and let us listen carefully to the strange and beautiful thing he finally wrote at the very end. Long before the river and the man in linen, God had been preparing Daniel for what he would one day write. The visions of the end did not fall on a stranger to suffering. They fell on a man who had already learned the hard way that God rules over kings. He learned it as a young captive who refused the king's rich food and asked to be fed plain vegetables and water instead, and came out healthier than the young men who ate from the royal table. He learned it the night his 3 friends were thrown into a furnace, heated so fiercely that it killed the soldiers who carried them, and yet they walked out without so much as the smell of smoke on their clothes, because a 4th figure had been seen standing with them in the fire. He learned it when he himself was thrown to lions for the crime of praying, and walked out the next morning untouched, the mouths of the beasts held shut, by an unseen hand. And he learned it by watching empires fall. He stood in the banquet hall the night a proud king drank from the holy cups taken out of God's temple, and saw a hand appear and write that king's doom across the wall. Before the sun rose, the king was dead, and his kingdom belonged to someone else. Daniel watched the most powerful court in the world end in a single night. So by the time God showed him the end of all kingdoms, Daniel already knew the pattern deep in his bones. He had seen God protect the faithful in the furnace and the den. He had seen God bring down a throne overnight. The man who would write that every empire has an expiration date had personally outlived more than one of them. This was never theory for Daniel. It was the story of his own long life, and it is part of why his words carry such weight. He did not simply predict that God rules history. He had spent a lifetime watching it happen with his own eyes. It began years earlier, when Daniel was still a young man in Babylon. The king of that empire, Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream that left him shaking, and not one of his wise men could tell him what it meant. Daniel prayed, and God showed him both the dream and its meaning. The king had seen a towering statue of a man. Its head was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its middle was bronze, its legs were iron, and its feet were a brittle mixture of iron and clay. Then in the dream, a stone appeared. No human hand carved it or threw it. It struck the feet of the statue, and the whole thing collapsed into dust and blew away like chaff in the wind. And the stone grew. It became a mountain that filled the entire earth. Daniel explained that the statue was a calendar of kingdoms. The golden head was Babylon, the empire ruling in that moment. After it would come another and another and another, each one rising and then falling in its turn. Empires that did not yet exist were already accounted for. History was not a chain of accidents. It was moving along a path that God had already mapped. But the heart of the dream was not the statue. It was the stone. Daniel told the most powerful king on earth that all his gold and iron would one day be swept away, and that God would set up a kingdom of his own that no army could ever break. He said it plainly. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Every empire in that statue is gone now. The gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, all of it has crumbled into history books. But the kingdom Daniel pointed to has not crumbled, because it was never built by human hands. The very first vision Daniel received already carried the seed of everything he would write later. The kingdoms of men have an expiration date. The kingdom of God does not. There is a detail in that statue that is easy to rush past, and Daniel did not rush past it. The feet, the part that held the whole weight of the figure, were the strangest part of all. They were a mixture of iron and clay, two things that will never truly hold together. Iron is strong. Clay crumbles in your hand. Press them into one shape, and you get something that looks solid but cannot bond, ready to break apart the moment any real weight comes down on it. Daniel was being shown the true nature of human power in its final form. From a distance, it can look enormous and unbreakable, all iron and might. But underneath, it is mixed with clay. It cannot hold its people together. It cannot make itself last. Every great kingdom carries the crack of its own ending hidden inside it, no matter how strong it appears on the surface. And notice where the stone struck. It did not hit the golden head or the iron legs. It struck the feet, the weakest point. the very place where iron and clay refused to join. One blow there, and the entire towering figure came crashing down. The mightiest image the world could build was undone at its most brittle seam. That is a quiet comfort for anyone who feels crushed by powers that seem far too big to ever fall. The things that frighten us are often more brittle than they look. They are iron mixed with clay, holding a shape they cannot keep. And the kingdom of God does not arrive as a bigger version of the same thing. It comes as a stone that no human hand carved, and that stone does not crack. It only grows until it fills the whole earth. Years passed. Daniel grew older, and one night the visions came to him directly, no longer through a king's troubled sleep, but through his own. What he saw that night was darker and stranger than a shining statue. He saw a great sea churning under a violent wind, and out of the water came 4 beasts, each one more terrible than the last. The first was like a lion with the wings of an eagle. The second was like a bear raised up on one side, with ribs in its teeth. The third was like a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, fast and hungry. And the fourth was something no animal could describe. It was dreadful and strong beyond the others, with iron teeth that crushed and devoured everything in its path, and it trampled whatever was left. Out of its head grew horns, and among them rose a small horn with the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke proud and boastful things against heaven itself. The same empires from the statue were here again, but now they wore their true faces. From the outside, empires look golden and glorious. From God's side of things, they often behave like beasts, tearing and devouring and exalting themselves. Daniel was being shown that the powers people fear are not as noble as they pretend, and not as permanent as they claim. And then the scene changed completely. The beasts and their boasting fell silent, because a courtroom opened in heaven. Daniel watched thrones being set in place. He saw the Ancient of Days take his seat, his clothing white as snow, his throne blazing like fire, with thousands upon thousands standing before him. The books were opened. The proud horn that had spoken so loudly was silenced, and its body was destroyed. Every beast that had terrified the world was stripped of its power in a single moment by the quiet authority of God on his throne. That alone would have been enough. But what Daniel saw next is the center of everything he wrote. Into that heavenly courtroom came a figure unlike any of the beasts. The beasts had come up out of a stormy sea from below. This one came down from above, riding on the clouds of heaven. And he did not look like a monster. He looked like a man. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory, and a kingdom, that all people, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Daniel certainly never forgot it. After all the beasts, after all the empires that rose by violence and fell by violence, the world is finally handed over, not to another conqueror, but to one who looks like a Son of Man. He receives a kingdom that does not pass away, and every nation and language on earth will serve him. Daniel did not know his name yet. He only knew his shape, a man given everlasting rule, coming on the clouds, honored by the Ancient of Days. Centuries later, a carpenter from Nazareth would stand before the leaders of his own people, and when they demanded to know who he thought he was, he would answer them with this exact vision. He called himself the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, and they understood instantly what he was claiming. Daniel had seen him from far away. Now he was standing in the room. This is the deeper thread that runs under all of Daniel's visions, and it is the thing most people miss when they treat his book like a doomsday puzzle. Daniel was not finally pointing at a date. He was pointing at a person. We should not move past these visions too quickly, as though they were easy to receive. They were not. When the man clothed in linen came to Daniel by the river, the sight nearly killed him. His strength left him. His face turned pale. He could not even breathe properly until a hand touched him and a voice told him not to be afraid. There is something honest in that. Daniel was a man of deep faith, a man who had survived a den of lions, and yet standing at the edge of eternity left him shaking on the ground. The end of the world is not a small thing to look at. It is heavy. It presses on the soul. And God did not pretend otherwise. He met his servant in his weakness, lifted him up, and gave him strength to keep listening. The messenger told Daniel something else strange. He said he had been delayed on his way for 21 days, held up by unseen resistance, until help came so he could finally reach Daniel. For the first time, Daniel was being allowed to glimpse that there is a struggle happening behind the curtain of history, a conflict we cannot see with our eyes. The kings fighting on earth were not the only powers at work. And yet, even with all of that unseen conflict, the message still arrived. The word God intended for Daniel was not lost. It was only delayed, and then it came. Heaven is not silent, and heaven is not late. What God means to give you will reach you. Sometime before the man in linen came to him, Daniel saw a ram standing by a river, a ram with 2 horns, one of them taller than the other. The ram charged in every direction, and nothing could stand against it. Then a goat came rushing in from the west, moving so fast its feet seemed not to touch the ground, and it had a single great horn between its eyes. The goat struck the ram, shattered its 2 horns, and trampled it. But at the height of its power, the goat's great horn was broken, and in its place 4 smaller horns grew up toward the sky. Daniel did not have to guess what it meant, because the angel Gabriel told him plainly. The ram with 2 horns was the kingdom of Media and Persia. The goat was the kingdom of Greece, and its great horn was its first king. When that king fell, his kingdom would be divided into 4 parts that did not carry his strength. Now, remember when Daniel wrote this? The empire ruling the world in his day was still Babylon, and after Babylon would come Persia. Greece was not yet a power anyone feared. Yet here, set down in writing centuries in advance, was the rise of Persia, its defeat by a swift Greek conqueror, the sudden breaking of that conqueror at the peak of his strength, and the splitting of his empire into 4. History walked it out exactly as Daniel had recorded it, long after he was dead and his book was old. This is why we cannot wave Daniel away as a frightened man guessing at the dark. He named the kingdoms before they came. He described the swift goat that would not seem to touch the ground, and the world watched it happen. And if the parts of Daniel's writing that we can already check came true with that kind of precision, then the parts that point past our own day deserve to be taken with the same seriousness. The same hand that wrote the rise of Greece centuries early wrote the promise of resurrection and the coming of the Son of Man. There is also a moment in Daniel's book where his sight reaches forward and lands, not on a beast or an empire, but on a single person who would change everything. It happened while Daniel was praying. He had been reading the older prophets, and he understood that the 70 years of his people's exile were almost finished. So he poured out his heart to God, confessing his nation's sins and pleading for mercy. And while he was still praying, Gabriel came to him again with an answer that reached far beyond the return from exile. Gabriel spoke of a span of time measured in sevens, a span set apart for a purpose larger than rebuilding a city. He said it was decreed to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Then he spoke of an anointed one who would come and who would be cut off, though not for himself. This was a promise to make an end of sins, to deal with the wrong we have done, and to bring in a righteousness that would last forever. This is not the language of politics or war. This is the language of rescue. Daniel was being shown that somewhere along the line of history, before the final courtroom and the final kingdom, an anointed one would arrive whose work would deal with sin itself, and that this anointed one would be cut off, struck down in the doing of it. Centuries later, a man was anointed not with oil, but with the Spirit of God at a river called the Jordan. He went about making an end of sins, forgiving the guilty and healing the broken, and then he was cut off, crucified outside the city walls, though he had done nothing to deserve it. Daniel had written of that arrival long before there was a manger or a cross. The end of the world that Daniel saw is anchored to a moment in the middle of history when God dealt with the deepest problem any of us carries, which is not the rise of empires, but the weight of our own sin. Here is where so many readers go wrong. They open the book of Daniel hoping it will tell them the day. They want the year, the month, the name of the final ruler, the exact hour the world will close. And it is true that Daniel's visions are full of numbers and seasons and strange measured times. People have spent whole lifetimes trying to line them up with calendars. But step back and look at what Daniel actually emphasized, and you will notice something. He was never given a date he could circle. What he was given over and over was a verdict. The beasts are judged, the proud mouth is silenced, the thrones are set, the kingdom is taken from the violent and handed to the Son of Man. The faithful who suffered and held on are vindicated at last. Every vision marches toward the same courtroom and the same outcome. That is what Daniel wrote down. Not the timing of the end, but the result of it. And the result is justice. The result is that the cruelty and pride that seem to win in this world do not get the last word. The result is that the people who quietly kept faith while the powerful mocked them are not forgotten when the books are opened. If you have ever watched the wrong people prosper while the gentle and the faithful are pushed aside, Daniel is speaking directly to you. He saw the end, and the end is not chaos. The end is a verdict, and it falls on the side of God and His people. When the courtroom opened in Daniel's vision, one small detail sits quietly at the center of it. The books were opened. In that scene of thrones and fire and thousands of attendants, the deciding moment was not a weapon or an army. It was the opening of records. That image holds more comfort than it first appears. To say that books are kept is to say that nothing is forgotten. Every act of faithfulness that no one noticed, every prayer whispered in an empty room, every kindness done with no one watching, every tear cried alone, all of it is written down. The God on the throne does not run his judgment on rumor or appearance. He runs it on a record, and his record is complete. For the proud powers that strut across history, that is a frightening thing. The boastful mouth that spoke against heaven assumed no one was keeping count, but heaven was. For the faithful who feel overlooked, it is the opposite of frightening. It means your life is not vanishing into thin air. The quiet years of holding on, the long obedience that won you no applause, the love you poured out where it was never returned, None of it is lost. It is written down, and one day the books will open, and what was done in secret will be brought into the light. Daniel had lived as one of those overlooked faithful. He served kings who took the credit in a land that bowed to other gods, far from anyone who shared his hope. And he was shown that there is a record, and a throne, and a day when the record is read aloud. That is part of what steadied him through 70 years of exile, and it can steady you too. You are not living unseen. You are living in front of a God who writes everything down and forgets nothing good. After all the beasts and horns and falling empires, after all the heavy and frightening images, the very last thing Daniel was shown is not destruction, it is resurrection. The man clothed in linen told him this. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars for ever and ever. This is one of the clearest promises of resurrection in the entire Old Testament, and it is tucked into the end of a book about the end of the world. Daniel was told that death is not the final page. People who have gone down into the dust will wake. There is a morning coming after the long night, and on that morning the faithful will not merely survive, they will shine. The ones the world overlooked, the ones who turned others toward God in quiet and forgotten ways, will blaze like stars that never burn out. Think about who first read those words. People who felt buried already, people in exile, far from home, watching their loved ones die in a foreign land with no monument and no honor. To them God said, "The dust is not the end of you. You will awake. You will shine." That is what the end of the world holds for those who belong to God. Not a furnace of fear, but a sunrise. Then God gave Daniel an instruction that sounds almost backward. After showing him the whole sweep of history and the resurrection at the end of it, he told Daniel to close the scroll and lock it up. "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Why would God reveal something and then tell his prophet to seal it away? Because not everything was meant to be understood in Daniel's lifetime. Some of what he saw was for a generation far in the future, people who would read his words long after he was gone and finally see them come into focus. Daniel was a faithful messenger, carrying a letter addressed partly to a time he would never reach. There is humility in that, and there is comfort too. Daniel did not have to understand everything in order to be faithful with what he was given. He wrote it, he sealed it, and he trusted that God knew exactly who would need it and when. You and I do not have to solve every mystery in Scripture before we can trust the God behind it. We are allowed to hold some things with open hands, knowing they will be clear in their time. Faith is not the same thing as having every answer. Faith is trusting the one who does. The same verse adds a curious line. The messenger said that as the end draws near, many would run back and forth, and knowledge would increase. Daniel was told that his sealed words were not meant to stay locked away forever. They were meant to open gradually as the world moved closer to the time they described. A book sealed in one age is a book waiting to be understood in another. That is part of why Daniel still speaks so vividly to people now, in a world that rushes everywhere and knows more than any generation before it, yet often feels more afraid than ever. The words he sealed were written, in part, for ears like ours. Daniel's visions do speak honestly of hard times coming for the people of God, a stretch of trouble unlike anything before it. The man in linen described it with a strange phrase that turns up more than once in the book. A time and times and half a time. It is deliberately not a date. But beneath the mystery, it carries a promise that is easy to miss. The trouble is measured. It has a beginning, and far more importantly, it has an end. What Daniel saw was not an endless darkness. It was a season with a boundary drawn around it, a fixed number of days, shorter than anyone living through them would dare to hope. God did not hand his people an open wound with no closing. He set a limit on the suffering before it ever began, and to the one who holds on through it, the angel spoke a blessing. He said, "The person who waits and keeps waiting and reaches the end of those days is blessed, not the one who escapes the trouble, but the one who endures all the way to the far side of it." The waiting itself, the holding on when everything inside you says, "let go," is counted as faithfulness, and it ends in blessing. If you are walking through a long season right now that feels like it will never break, hear what Daniel wrote down for you. Your trouble has an edge to it that you cannot see from where you stand. It is measured by a God who has already counted the days. He has not promised that you will be spared the waiting. He has promised that the waiting ends and that the one who reaches the end of it is blessed. And now we reach the final words of the book, the last thing the man in linen said to Daniel before the vision closed. After everything, after the empires and the beasts and the courtroom and the resurrection, God turned his attention away from world history and back to one tired old man standing by a river. And what he said was deeply personal. "But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days." Go your way. Daniel had carried an enormous weight. He had seen things that made him fall to the ground. He had spent his last years mourning his city and praying for his people. And God did not tell him to keep straining to understand it all, or to fix the future, or to carry the burden of the whole world's ending on his shoulders. God told him to go his way, to keep living his ordinary, faithful life, to finish his days in peace. Then came the promise, "You shall rest." After all the labor and the exile and the fear, there would be rest. And after the rest, you shall stand in your lot at the end of the days. You will rise. You will be there, in your place, among the people of God, when everything is made new. The man who saw the end of the world was promised, by name, a share in the world that comes after it. That is the thing Daniel wrote. After all the visions of falling kingdoms, the message that closes his book is a quiet word to a single weary soul. Go your way, rest, you will rise and stand in your place. The end of the world, for the one who belongs to God, turns out to be a homecoming. Step back now and take in the whole shape of what Daniel left us. He saw a statue that was secretly a calendar of crumbling empires. He saw beasts rise out of a stormy sea, and he saw them stripped of their power by the God on the throne. He saw thrones set and books opened. And in the middle of all of it, he saw one like a son of man come on the clouds and receive a kingdom that will never end. For a long time, that figure was a mystery, even to Daniel. But the mystery has a name now. The Son of Man that Daniel saw from a distance is the same Jesus who walked the roads of Galilee, who used that very title for himself, and who told his followers that he would come again on the clouds of heaven exactly as Daniel had described. The end of the world is not finally a force or an event. It is a face. It is a person who looks like one of us because he became one of us, and who holds a kingdom that no empire can shake. This is why Daniel's vision of the end is not a vision of terror for the people of God. The one who comes at the end is the same one who came in weakness, who was rejected and put to death, and who rose from the dust himself before, promising that we would rise too. The Son of Man, Daniel saw on the clouds, first lay in a borrowed tomb. He has already walked through death and come out the other side. The hand that touched Daniel and told him not to be afraid is the same hand that was pierced for us. Maybe you are watching this because the world around you feels like it is coming apart, and quietly you are afraid. Maybe you are older now, and the body that once carried you easily has started to fail. Maybe you feel forgotten, living far from the people you love in a season of life that no one seems to notice. Maybe you have prayed for so long that you have begun to wonder if heaven is silent or simply late. Daniel knew all of that. He was old, he was far from home, he was surrounded by power that did not honor his God, and his prayers were once held up for 3 long weeks before the answer arrived. And yet the last word spoken over him was not fear, it was rest. It was a promise that he would stand in his place at the end of the days. That same word is spoken over you. The kingdoms that frighten you have an expiration date written into them, just like the gold and the iron of that old statue. The God on the throne has already read the verdict, and it falls on the side of his people. Death is not the final page for those who belong to him, because the dust will give back its own, and the faithful will shine like the stars forever. And the one who meets us at the end is not a beast or a tyrant. He is the Son of Man, with kindness in his eyes and a kingdom in his hands. So go your way, the way God has set before you, one ordinary faithful day at a time. You do not have to understand everything. You do not have to carry the weight of the world's ending. You only have to keep walking with the God who already wrote the end thousands of years ago, and who tucked into the last line of it a promise meant for you. You shall rest, and you shall rise, and you shall stand in your place among his own when all the long days are finally done. If this video helped you grow deeper in God's Word, I want to personally invite you to be part of what we are building here. Every video on this channel takes many hours of study and careful research to make sure we bring you content that is faithful to Scripture and worthy of your time. If you would like to support this mission and help us keep making these videos, you can find a link in the description below to give a one-time gift or become a monthly supporter. Every gift, no matter the size, goes directly toward creating more content like this. And if you are not in a position to give right now, that is completely fine. The best thing you can do is subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and keep studying God's Word with us. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you richly.